Welcome to Betrayal Narrative X.
I thought I was married to a woman who sleeps with me because she loves me. Turns out it's because she knows I hate sleeping alone. Let's get acquainted. Write in the comments what city and country are you from? A Friday night, a third glass of cheap Chardonnay, a slight hum from the next room, and my brain that seems to be tired of being naive. It all started when I stepped out of the shower and heard Mary, my wife, chatting with her friends in the living room. I don't usually eavesdrop, not out of nobility, but more out of laziness. But something in her tone caught my ear. Not her voice, it was casual, her playful femininity, turned on automatically when she was in company. It was the words, simple with a slight giggle, and the same intonation she usually reserved for our conversations when she wanted to get something done. "He thinks intimacy is about feelings," she said, and the room erupted in laughter. "And I'm just in control. I know when to let him do what he needs to do. It works every time. Men are simple. Give them a couple times a week, and they'll carry you around in their arms." It's not like I knew what I was hearing right away. You know, there are times when your brain seems to have processed everything, but hasn't decided how to react yet. It's like standing at a cliff looking down, and only after a couple of seconds you think, hey, that's high. I went back to the bedroom, sat down on the bed. I listened again, but they were already talking about someone named Lindsay who was apparently sleeping with her fitness trainer. There's a lot of information and zero desire to process it. I just sat in my towel, water dripping down my back, and suddenly realized that in all the time Mary and I had been together, I'd never once wondered why she was with me in the first place. See, I'm not talking about the classic love me or my money paranoia. She and I didn't have a control struggle. I just loved her. I thought it was mutual. And now I'm sitting remembering. Here she asks me to buy a new couch, and in an hour we have a hot evening in the bedroom. I promised not to be late at work, and suddenly we have a spontaneous, romantic dinner. Small deals wrapped in passion. You know, I'm not a Puritan. I'm a grown man with a history of marriage divorce and a couple of dumb romances. I know the difference between intimacy and feelings. But it's one thing to play with each other. It's another when you're always a gambler and only the dealer knows the rules. And so that Friday, in the silence of my bedroom, I felt for the first time in years that I wanted to turn this game off. Not in a fit of resentment. Not hysterically, but calmly, coldly, with interest. As if I suddenly realized that I was reading a script where my character was not a hero, but just a tool. A tool in the hands of a smart, beautiful, and completely calculating woman. So I figured, okay. If she was playing, it was time to find out what would happen when the cards were removed from the table. What's left when I just stop reacting? No scandal. No hard feelings. Just disappear, not physically of course, but from her script. The next day, I began. She came into the kitchen in the morning, as usual, wearing one of those silk robes that hide almost nothing. She made coffee, looked in the refrigerator, rummaged through the cereal drawer. "You slept soundly," she said, as if unintentionally, and ran her finger down my arm. I nodded and jabbed at my phone. Not a joke. Not a look. No flirting. Just, you slept in, and that was it. She froze for a second, but quickly moved on to discussing weekend plans, as if nothing had happened. From that day on, I began to take the levers out of her hands in small steps. Not arguing, but not agreeing. Not taking offense, but not approaching. I began to lose interest in the things she used to control my reactions. Intimacy became infrequent. Interest became ostentatious. Emotions dosed. I acted as if nothing had happened. Like I was just different. Different. Less driven. More free. And it pissed her off. I could see her getting more tense every day. Couldn't understand what was happening. Why what was working wasn't working anymore. Why her acting suddenly became uninteresting to the audience. The interesting thing is I didn't feel violent. I wasn't retaliating. I just let her feel what I felt when I realized I was living in a bargain. A deal where I was paying with emotion time trust, and I was getting a favor. 2 weeks after that night with my friends, she tried to have a heart-to-heart talk. Said she felt like I was drifting away. Something was wrong, maybe there were problems at work. I shrugged and said, "No, just thinking about a lot of things." That was it. No accusations. No revelations. She went into the bathroom, thinking I wasn't looking. And I saw her looking in the mirror, not at herself, but as if at someone inside. The insecurity was new to her. She didn't love it. And I was starting to love this side of her. The real one. The confused one. But I knew it wouldn't last long. When a person's way of control is taken away from them, they either retreat or lose their temper. Mary wasn't the kind of person who backs down. And I was right. In the next installment, she would cross that very line. I noticed the first signs of her panic after about 3 weeks. She started suggesting spontaneous weekend getaways for the two of us, more often planning candlelight dinners, suddenly remembering that she once loved to cook my favorite dishes. Mary wasn't usually the type to try for no reason. She always had a motive for everything. So her abrupt kindness didn't move me, but alerted me. This was no longer her usual game. This was her control in agony. She felt herself losing control, and frantically tried to regain the levers, like a man whose steering wheel had slipped out of his hands at speed. I could see her trying to find new pressure points. She talked about having children, although we were both in no hurry, or she asked me to help her with her new project at work. "Just to have you around to make me feel better," she said. There was something sincere, even touching about it. But the problem was that after that conversation with my friends, I could no longer take her words the way I used to. They still sounded beautiful. But behind them, there was an emptiness, like reading a greeting card from a stranger. Sometimes she tried to get closer, physically sitting on my lap, hugging me from behind while I watched TV. But I didn't push away. I let her, with a slight, almost icy politeness. Not a hint of passion, not the slightest response. And that coldness was stronger than any scream. I saw her eyes slowly begin to change expression. There was something there that hadn't been there before. Fear. Real fear. Not for me. For her power. One night, when we were about to go to bed, she suddenly turned to me and said, "You don't want me anymore, do you? Not in the way you want me to." She frowned. I knew it sounded abstract, even confusing. But that was the answer I wanted to give. Let her unravel the tangle. I used to talk it through, explain it, reassure her. Now I don't. Let her think. Just like I thought when I heard her bragging about her power over me. The next few days were like a slow-motion movie. She fussed more and more, tried to turn on the jealousy, said she was being flirted with at work. Then she supposedly casually mentioned that an ex had posted on Instagram. I nodded silently. I became as neutral as possible, not because I was indifferent, but because I wanted her to face her emptiness on her own, without the feeding frenzy, without the usual response. Then she started disappearing for evenings. Said she was out with friends. A couple times she came back later than usual, smelling of wine and some new perfume, not the kind I gave her. Her attempts to pick me up became obvious, primitive, almost pathetic. I watched her image of the perfect, confident woman crumble, and for the first time in a long time, I felt like maybe I was starting to see the real Mary again. The one who wasn't sure, who wasn't playing, who wasn't in control. And for a moment, I almost felt compassion for her. Almost. And then there was an evening I won't forget. Not at all. She and I were planning to go to my best friend Sharon's house to visit. She was having an engagement dinner, and her fiancé, Mark, seemed like a normal guy. Quiet, polite, IT guy, no bullshit. I can't say he and I are friends, but we had a normal conversation. Mary said she couldn't go. She had an urgent meeting on her design project. I didn't argue. I just nodded. In the evening, I went alone. So there I am, standing in Sharon's living room among the guests, glass in hand, when my phone starts to vibrate. The notification is from my security camera. I installed it a while ago. Didn't tell Mary. Not out of paranoia. Just decided to be a little more observant. I opened the app. And at that moment, something inside me snapped. No, I didn't start shaking or thrashing. I just stared at the screen and saw Mark, my best friend's fiancé, walk into my house. 20 seconds later, Mary appears. She's wearing the very dress she said she wouldn't wear. Too flashy for a business meeting. I watched them drinking wine, her laughing, him coming closer. I didn't turn the camera off. I just watched. No sound. In complete silence. And only one thought was bouncing around in my head. Did you really think I was that blind? I left Sharon's house about 15 minutes later. I said I was tired. Didn't turn on any music on the way back. I wasn't mad. Not yet. There was a feeling of clarity. Like everything was finally falling into place. There was no more speculation. Just facts. I didn't go into the house right after I got back. I just sat in the car, staring out the dark windows where she was probably already in bed, pretending that nothing had happened. Or more likely thinking up another move in which I was to be a pawn again. When I did enter, the house smelled of expensive perfume red wine and something that shouldn't have been there. It was a smell of lies, not pathetic, not shouty lies, but the kind of quiet, everyday lies that embed themselves in the walls. Mary was in bed, hair loose, a mask of serenity on her face. She was always good at pretending. "Hey, how was dinner?" she asked in a half-asleep voice, as if nothing was bothering her, as if she hadn't just slept with my best friend's fiancé in our bedroom. I sat on the edge of the bed without looking at her. I put my phone on the nightstand, unlocked the screen. I opened the recording and pressed play. No words, no commentary, no pathos. For the first 20 seconds, she just didn't say anything. I could see her eyes going through her options: denial, anger, manipulation, tears, justification. All of that flashed by in a matter of seconds. But she didn't have time to say anything. Because I finally spoke. "This isn't cheating. It's a test shot. At us. Anything that might still be left." She opened her mouth, but I interrupted. Not rudely, but in a way that made it clear that the dialogue ended before it began. "You know what's ironic, Mary? You used intimacy as a tool to control me. You thought it was your power. And now that you've gone all the way, you're left with nothing. Because I don't give in anymore. And you have no one to push. You took a shot and you missed. Because I'm already dead inside. And your bullet flew through the void." She sat silent, her fingers clenched into fists. I could see that she wanted to scream, to throw her emotions out, to break something, to throw a tantrum as she had before when things got out of control. But something was stopping her. Maybe it was fear. Or maybe it was the realization that I was no longer the person she was used to manipulating. "Why didn't you say something before?" she asked quietly at last. "Why didn't you leave?" I laughed. Not maliciously. Just human. It was funny to hear it after everything I'd been through. Because I wanted to see what you'd become when you stopped feeling the power. I wanted to see if there was anything real left. Love. Respect. Or even basic regret. She was silent. "You answered for yourself. By your actions. You didn't lose because you cheated. It's because you thought it would give you an advantage. That when I saw it, I'd want you back. Or rage. Or want revenge. And I just, out of the game." She lowered her head. And for the first time in a long time, I saw the real Mary. No mask, no posture, no confidence. Just a woman who had made a bet and lost everything. And then, to my surprise, I felt not satisfaction, not gloating, but something akin to pity. Not for her, for us. For what could have been made of us if it hadn't been for all the manipulations, misunderstandings, and psychological chess. "What now?" she asked. "Is that it? Are we splitting up?" I looked at her for a long time. A very long time. I didn't know what to say. Or knew, but wasn't ready to say it. Part of me wanted to just pack up and leave. No big words, no final chord. Just disappear from her life the way feelings disappear when you stop feeding them honesty. But the other part, the part that still hoped that man was capable of change, kept me on my toes. So I said, "No, we're not splitting up. But if we stay, it's on one condition. No more games. No more tricks. No more intimacy for doing things. No manipulation through jealousy. No feminine tricks. Just reality. Just the truth. Even if it's unpleasant." She looked at me, as if she didn't know if she meant it. Then she nodded. Slowly. Uncertainly. Like a person who for the first time in her life is agreeing to terms she's afraid of. "Okay. I'll give it a shot." I stood up. I looked at her. And for the first time in a long time, I said, "Then try starting with the truth. Tell me why you chose Mark." And then her face changed. Because I guess I didn't know the most important thing. She was silent for a long time. I could see several emotions struggling in her gaze: fear, resentment, shame, and a strange tiredness. Mary always knew how to keep her face, especially when the truth was hidden behind it. Mark. He didn't start out the way you think he did. I sat back down on the edge of the bed, crossing my arms over my chest. Didn't interrupt. Didn't rush her. Her pauses were part of the confession now. And I knew that if I interrupted, she might not dare say the rest. I knew he wasn't your friend. Not a real 1 inch, she finally continued. I saw the way you interacted with him, carefully, through filters. You're always watching, always keeping your distance. And he's jealous of you. Haven't you noticed? He's always competing. Who's better dressed, who's got the coolest car, who's made the most money. Even Sharon. He didn't choose her out of love. He chose her because you once said she was smart. He needed to prove he could be better. Take it away. I didn't say anything. Because everything she was saying right now was goddamn true. Mark really did reach out to me with a kind of artificial loyalty, always trying to be on par. And I felt it, I just didn't pay attention. I wrote it off as a character trait. And you've decided to avenge me? I asked, barely containing the irony in my voice. No, she said sharply. I've decided to get back at you. For not being you anymore. That was unexpected. I even leaned forward a little, as if being closer would make it easier to understand her words. You have no idea what you've done to me in the last few months, she continued. You've pulled the whole foundation out from under me. You stopped reacting, stopped touching, stopped being alive. You were there for me, but you weren't. I felt empty. I didn't know how to get you back. And then, I saw Mark. He was flirting. Stupid corny. But I saw something in his eyes that wasn't in yours. Desire. Not control, not habit, not fatigue. Desire. And I decided not to bring you back. I decided to destroy you. Everything. Us. To make you feel what I felt. Powerlessness. She was talking, and I didn't feel angry with her anymore. In some twisted logic, it even made sense. We were both wearing masks, playing a game of controlled intimacy, an exchange of roles and rules. And at some point each of us decided that we could win if we struck first. You wanted to destroy everything, I repeated out loud. And you almost succeeded. I didn't mean for this to happen to Mark. It just happened. Although, maybe it wasn't an accident. Maybe I wanted it to be more painful for you. Because you've been a pain yourself these past few months. Every day, you were silent, distant, as if I were air, but not a loved one. I looked at her. And for the first time I saw not the woman I hated nor the woman I had once loved, but a human being. Wrong, tired, lost. Just like I felt. We both lost. Just pretending to fight. So what now? I asked. Should we just go on with our lives as if nothing had happened? She shook her head. No. Now we have to admit everything. No trying to fix it, no trying to justify it. Just accept that we both broke what we were building. And maybe try to build again. But without the foundation of lies. I got up. I went into the kitchen. Put the kettle on. She followed me. Silently. Without the usual tension. No mask. Just a person who had been playing for too long and was finally tired. Perhaps we were both tired enough to try honesty. Why Mark? Why now? Why so obviously and defiantly? Mary is not the kind of person who makes random choices. She is a strategist. Even when she destroys, she does it with the precision of a surgeon. She said it all. She wanted pain, she wanted a reaction, she wanted to take back control. But it was all too superficial. Too convenient. Too explainable to be real. It sounded like a confession written the night before, convincing with logic, but no inner sincerity. And so it was with that thought in mind that I woke up early this morning, brewed some coffee, sat down in the kitchen, opened my laptop, and started digging. Not out of jealousy. Out of pure, icy curiosity. If the person you've been sleeping with for 10 years turns out to be a complete stranger to you, You want to figure out who they've really been all along. The first thing I did was check Mark out on social media. I went to his Facebook, scrolled through his posts, and noted that almost everywhere he'd liked Mary's pictures, even the old ones from before he'd met Sharon. I let it pass by at first, but then went back again. One of the likes was on a photo from 10 years ago, Mary on prom night. I definitely remembered that we hadn't met yet, and Mark was living in a different city at the time. And that's where I went deeper. I scrolled through the comments, opened the profiles of mutual friends. I finally found one entry where he was tagged. 2013 Mary and Mark at some mutual friend's party. I stared at the photo for a long time, not believing it. They knew each other before we did. Long before us. They may have even been together. I didn't start the interrogation right away. I just went to work, pretended everything was fine. And that evening, when we were sitting across from each other at dinner, I said a phrase that I noticed made her fork in her hand tremble. And remember Lindsay's graduation in 2013? Why did you ask? I just saw Mark's picture. You were there together. A long time ago, weren't you? Did you know him back then? I asked, looking him straight in the eye. We were together, she finally said. Not for long. A few months. Before you. We dated. And then he just disappeared. No explanation. Disappeared. I didn't understand why. And then he showed up again as my friend's fiancé? I clarified. And you thought it was a sign? I didn't know how to react, she said quietly. I was shocked when you first brought me to Sharon and I saw him. He pretended he didn't know me too. We both pretended it never happened. But then he wrote, a couple weeks later, said he remembered everything, that he was sorry, that he wanted to talk. And you said yes. I was angry. At you. At him. At myself. It was all mixed up. I didn't want it to happen. But I guess somewhere inside I wanted to close that story. To get back at him. Or you. Or myself. I sat and listened and thought how much we humans like to delude ourselves about the past. We think we've closed chapters, that we've forgotten, that we've learned to let go. And then it comes back. Like a debt check. With a name, a face, and very precise timing. Mary didn't just cheat on me. She cheated with a man she once couldn't forgive. And now, years later, she was using our life as a stage for her own personal showdown. Ironically, I found myself in the middle of this drama by accident. I didn't tell her I was going to meet him. Not because I was afraid of a scene or an explanation I didn't want to hear. I just realized that this meeting had to happen without her involvement, without her emotions, without her version. Just me and him. Mark agreed as soon as I wrote. He suggested we meet at a coffee shop near his office. Typical choice. Public place, minimal chance of conflict. He even added at the end of the message, glad you want to talk, really. I read it twice and only hummed. Glad? What was he glad about? When I walked in, he was already sitting by the window. 2 coffees on the table. One was clearly for me, no sugar, like I always drank. So he was watching. Remembered. Or maybe Mary told me. Either way, it was a weak, almost pathetic gesture, as if a cup of coffee could smooth over what had happened between us. Glad you came, he said as I sat down. You knew, I said calmly, looking him straight in the eye, that she was my wife. From the beginning. He sighed, rubbed his neck as if that would erase the guilt. Yeah, I knew. But then I didn't know you were you. And then I found out. And then he went on. He nodded. No excuses. No attempt to turn the conversation into a joke or it was a mistake. And there was something far nastier in that silence than any excuse. You know what the most ironic thing is? I asked. You weren't my problem. You were just another symptom. My problem with her. I didn't come here to make a scene or make threats. I came because I wanted to look at you, at the face of the person she chose to punch. Not for pleasure, for destruction. He was silent. At that moment he looked not like a traitor, but like a man who hadn't realized what kind of game he was playing. Or he did, but he thought he was going to win. Only now he realized that he was in the middle of something he wasn't prepared for. Why did you disappear then? I asked, remembering her words about the past. He looked up, and for the first time in a while there was a flicker of confusion in them. Because that's when I found out she was dating two people at once, he said. One was me, the other was some dude 10 years older. I didn't bother to look into it. Just disappeared. I was young, stupid. Thought, why would I do that? I grinned. Very merry. All about power, all about choice. It's all calculated, even when she was young. And now you've decided it's time to go back and complete the circle? He shook his head. No, I just wasn't the person you thought I was. I really wanted Sharon. I really did. And then Mary came along. And something kicked in. Guilt? Habit? A sense of unfinished business? I don't quite understand it myself. We were silent for a couple more minutes. Then I stood up. There will be nothing between us. No revenge, no forgiveness. Just emptiness. You're part of the story, I closed. When I got home, Mary was sitting on the couch, wrapped in a blanket. For the first time in a long time, she wasn't holding her phone. She wasn't flipping through her feed. Didn't pretend to be busy. She just sat there. And I suddenly realized, whatever was going on between us, she felt the same way. Burnout. Loss. Wanting to make things right, but not sure if she could. You've met him, she said, without even asking. Yes, I answered. And I realized that he was not the main enemy. The enemy was within. Between us. In our self-imposed rules. In our attempts to be stronger, not closer. She nodded. Quietly. Almost imperceptibly. And now either we both leave the battlefield or we stay and learn to live like adults. No wars. No victories. No backstabbing. And, in that moment for the first time ever, she smiled. She was lying next to me, but she wasn't touching me as if she was afraid that one wrong move would bring us back to where we were already. You know, this all had to happen at some point. Even if it wasn't for Mark. Even if it wasn't for me. Even if we'd both tried our best. We were too right, she added. Too by the book. You were always the perfect husband, and I was always the perfect wife. We tried so hard to keep the form we forgot about the substance. Everything looked like love until there was a glitch. And the failure wasn't in the act. It was the system. Maybe we were never a couple. I said, it's just that we were both very good at playing family. Exactly. We were both too smart to walk away. And too proud to stay sincere. I looked at her. Not as the woman who'd cheated. Not as someone I'd lived with for 10 years. But as someone who, like me, was trapped in a picture that was too well constructed. Do you remember when we went to Sonoma the first year of our marriage? I asked you suddenly. You said then that you were afraid of being boring. That you wanted to be a bright wife who would be envied. I wasn't talking about looks, she said quietly. I was afraid I'd become predictable. That you'd stop looking at me with interest. That's why I started using intimacy as a tool. Not because I wanted to manipulate. It was because I was afraid of being forgotten. I didn't say anything. Because I realized I had the same problem. I didn't want to be weak. I didn't want to be needy. I wanted to be comfortable, strong, stable. So I became transparent. Predictable. Perfect, but not alive. We both tried to keep ourselves in other people's images. She's a woman who's afraid of being lost. I'm a man who's respected. And at some point we lost each other, not in bed, not in a fight, but in silence. And yet, I said we could have done things differently. If we'd started talking sooner. Could you listen to me? She asked. Back then, before all this? I honestly thought about it. And I realized no. I was too busy being right. To keep the cracks out. To keep up the facade. I couldn't, I admitted. I'd get defensive. Or offer solutions instead of just being there for me. She looked at me, and there was no pain or anger in her gaze. Just something akin to respect. Maybe for the first time in a long time. So what now? She asked, but hopefully not expectantly. It was more like an adult accepting the result of an exam she'd failed. I looked at her. For a long time. There was no plan in my head for how to go on living. There was no ready-made concept. Just one thought, very simple and very honest. We could start over. But not as a couple. But as two people who decided not to lie. Not to ourselves, not to each other. Just to be. No guarantee. No contract. No promises. but with honesty. And she nodded again, as if hearing not what she wanted to hear, but what was finally freeing. We both knew it wasn't about saving the marriage anymore. It was about trying to build something else. Maybe even more important. Something that isn't called love, but could be the beginning of it. 3 weeks had passed. We were still living under the same roof, but not as husband and wife, not as exes, not as enemies. Rather, as two people who were tired of holding on to masks, and who for the first time chose silence, not as a way of punishment, but as a form of respect. We didn't talk about repairing the relationship. We didn't have scheduled heart-to-heart talks. We just stopped playing. And in this new silence, a strange feeling was born, as if everything that came before was a draft. Wrong but necessary. Mary was less likely to linger in the bathroom when I walked by. I stopped obsessing over her phone on the table screen down. We both realized there was no point in snooping now, because real betrayals always start not with someone else's body, but with your own lies to yourself. One evening when the rain was particularly quiet outside her window, she cooked dinner. Didn't order it. Didn't reheat it. She cooked it just as she had done in the beginning. I sat across from her, and we ate in silence. Not because there was nothing to talk about. It was because the silence was no longer awkward. It became our own. "I don't know where this is going to take us," she said as she set her glass on the table. "But for the first time in a long time, I'm not afraid of not being perfect. And I'm not afraid to be real," I replied. We didn't kiss after those words. We didn't hug. We just finished our pasta and went to our rooms. The next morning, I went out for a run. A light breeze, the smell of wet asphalt, rare passers-by with takeaway coffee. The morning was surprisingly lively, almost cinematic. And then, at the intersection, while I was waiting for the green light, I saw her. A stranger. Her hair was in a sloppy bun, headphones, in her ears a book, in her hands not a phone, but a book. She was staring, at one point not noticing that I was looking at her. And there was something impossible in that moment, not romantic, not fateful, but open. It was as if the universe had briefly opened a crack into the future. The light changed, she went forward. So did I. We missed each other. Just two people walking in different directions. But for a few seconds parallel. And then I suddenly realized one simple thing. Sometimes to start something, you need not to destroy the old, but to live it to the end. Not run away. Not blame. But to recognize that even a mistake can be a point of growth. And not all destruction is tragedy. Some are simply liberation. When I got home, Mary was already getting ready for work. She looked at me differently. Not anxious, not hopeful. She looked at me calmly, as someone who no longer had to fight for power. And that was a relief. "Will I see you tonight?" she asked. "Perhaps," I replied for the first time without a sense of duty. And he's gone. Not a new life. Not a romantic ending. Just a day that might bring a new encounter. Or maybe just silence. And in that silence a place for a future that requires no promises, only honesty. Thank you for watching, and I will see you in the next video. If you like the story, please give this video a thumbs up and leave a comment below. Your support helps the algorithm show my content more often. If you are new to the channel, do not forget to hit that subscribe button. It really helps me keep making more stories for you.